Welcome. Today we are taking a full dive into the world of flexible nibs on fountain pens. Why a flexible nib? Most nibs range from extra fine to double broad, and they are what they are. They are consistent. If you put pressure on the tines, or if you put pressure when you're writing, you might get a little bit more ink flow, but the line width should stay basically consistent. Now, a good flex nib, on the other hand, spans all the way from extra fine to double broad, right? We've got fine, and then if you flex it a little bit, you can get like thicker lines there. So why a flex? Well, you get way more line variation, and that gives you maximum emotion in your writing. You can go from an extra fine all the way to a double broad or bigger, depending on your flex. So it's something that can really add accentuation to your writing. So one thing about flex nibs that you need to know is you need to use them in a particular manner or you could damage them. These tines are flexible, and that means that if you are flexing them in a motion that puts them out of alignment, you could damage the nib potentially permanently. So what that means is you only flex when you can keep the nibs in alignment, and pretty much what that means is you only flex on the downward pull. So when you're going up, no, you pull, right? You flex there, ready, flex, up, nothing, flex. So that's why you see this kind of pattern a lot. But if you were to go ahead and try and flex when you're doing, this upward motion, that's going to put them out of alignment, and you're not going to do well. You could hurt your nib. So it requires more careful consideration when you are writing with a flex nib. But when you get good, you can still have good speed. All right, let's take a look at these pens. So we're starting in the vintage world over here, okay? Because vintage Superflexes have a feel all their own, and they have quite the notoriety in the fountain pen world for that particular feel. So first up, we've got a 1917-18 Wall 10-point. It's an ebonite pen with a gold overlay. And check out this over 100-year-old ball roller cap. Is really cool, reminiscent of a Leonardo currently. They did that 100 years ago. Next up, we've got the 1920s Eggins and Hambler Company. This is a full flex that was made for a banker at some point. I even have the original box, and it's got a beautiful stamping on it. Here you go, custom made for an order, the American State Bank and Trust, Dipartimento Italiano in Pennsylvania. Then we've got a 1930s Conklin. And check out the spring action on this clip, right? It's like reminiscent of a Visconti with that spring in there. And finally, we've got a 1930s Maybe Todd over here from England. So we've got 4 full flex nibs there from the vintage world. All of these are number 2 sized in the vintage sizing. And we also have a 1930s Security brand full flex nib, and this one was a number 5, so it's more reminiscent of our current modern size nibs. All right, so all together, we've got 5 vintage full flex pens dating from about 1917 up through about 1930s. Over here, we have current production offerings from Pilot. Here is a custom 743 with the Falcon nib, and then we've got a Magna Carta Mag 600. Then from the custom nib world, this is a FPR/FNF full flex gold nib. And here we have an awesome custom Salamander Sharkbait full flex nib. All right, so as you can see, I've got 5 vintages, 2 modern productions, and 2 custom flex nibs. So I feel like I've got enough breadth of experience that I can actually begin to talk to you and explain this topic. Let's just get right into it, shall we? The vintage feel. How do I kind of rate that? It definitely has its own feel, and it's awesome, and I will try and rate that on kind of a continuum here. And in the vintage side of things, we've got more snapback. And what that means is you got more line delineation when you lighten up, because you have like a quicker snapback to your tines, which means it closes off that ink flow a little bit faster, and I think you get a little bit more line variation because of that snapback. And I think that snapback is really what defines the vintage feel, and I don't think a lot of people kind of mention that in reviews and things that I've seen. Now this bigger number 5 vintage demonstrates that even more so, right? This is more akin to a modern size nib that we would find like a Bach 6 or a Jovo 6. And you can really see when you turn that over, it's like it's pointed down. It's got almost like a beak hook. This was so common on the old pens because of how it functioned, right? I'm going to see how many I can stack here together. Here's that wall, 10.2. Now on the other end of the spectrum, we've got what I would call a more paintbrush feel. And that is when you kind of apply your pressure, you definitely feel those tines like widen out, but it's almost like you're painting with a paintbrush, like a tiny paintbrush is how I describe it. And if you look here, right, you can see in that nib, there's no hook beak type feature there. So you're going to have a different feel. Now this is more modern. People say the Mag 600 is the closest to a vintage feel that you can get. At this point, I gotta disagree. I think that the Mag 600 feels very much like a little paintbrush, and it does not feel at all like any of my vintage pens. And I do think it goes into that nib architecture. Now, this is a great flexible pen. I really enjoy this pen and how it flexes. So much so that I kept it in the collection, absolutely. But we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So here we have a spectacular comparison of all of my personal flex pens in my collection. We started with the 743 over here, and as you see, I tried to do a no pressure, a regular pressure, and then all out flex to see what it could do. So as we're going up, we've got the 743, we've got the Mag 600. The Mag 600 is notably more flexible than the 743. So if you're going for a production flex pen, the Mag 600 takes the cake over the 743. And also over a Scribo pen that I recently tried as well. I tried one of their full flexes. So if you're going for modern production pen, you want the Mag 600. Now, if you're going for modern custom nib, over here, we've got a gold flex from FPR, Fountain Pen Revolution. It was a commission through Flexible Nib Factory, FNF. And again, you see this thing is crazy flexible, even compared to anything over here in the vintage section. And then if you're going for all out, just maximum flex, nothing beats my Salamander Sharkbait Flex Nib. This thing is more of a paintbrush, so it's harder to get a nice, consistent fine line just because the slightest hint of pressure will start to flex. But look at that amazing flex. I smeared some ink over here, but everything else is just all that pen. Now, if you're talking about feel, look at the difference between the vintages over here versus the modern productions up top, okay? So pretty much all the vintages equal or outflex my most flexible Mag 600 modern pen, okay? So this is where people say the vintages have the better feel compared to any modern production pen. They really do. Even compared to these guys have much greater snapback, and what that means is you get the line variation more easily. When you come out of a line, it snaps back quick and it cuts off that flow of ink, so you can start to really get nice line variation, which is one of the reasons why these guys are much more wet noodles. And these things, when I use a vintage pen, I get this performance, and it might take, I don't know, 15-30 seconds at most to dry. These guys over here are wet noodles, and they will take 4 to 5 minutes maybe even to dry. So it's a very different feel. These ones are much more pragmatic. As far as my all-out favorite feel and usability, I go with this one right here. And actually, I'm going to pull it up so you can see it. I put it on the modern Leonardo. So because this is a modern body, I was able to use a converter, and I can clean everything. So that means I can use shimmer, which I can't use on any of my vintages because of the sacks and the more complicated cleaning aspects, or you can't disassemble most vintages easily. So anyway, so I get the benefits of the shimmer with this one, and it's a larger vintage nib, so it's more akin to the modern nibs that we have today. And not only that, but it is one of my most flexy nibs all out, and especially with the snapback, and I get much more Fine writing. I realized I didn't do the no pressure here, so I did it down here in a different ink. These are so pragmatic because when vintages were made, paper cost money that you didn't want to spend. And, you know, it was an exorbitant fee type thing, right? So people would cram as much writing onto a piece of paper as they could, which meant you needed lots and lots of tiny, fine lines. But the ability for this pen to flex to this is insane compared to pretty much everything else here, albeit these guys, but then this has a super different feel with the snapback. And again, it goes back to that nice, easy, no pressure line. So this is my all-out favorite, but this is not going to be easy to get. Otherwise, I love this shark bait. This thing feels like a paintbrush to write with, and I just keep going back to it over and over. This thing is just amazing to write with. It's a whole nother experience of fountain pen, and it's one of the first nibs that I honestly just want to go order a second. So check out Sally Mander on Instagram. Let's do this. Let's rate these. All right, so the best feel overall, I'm going to go ahead and give to the vintages. And that's because the crisp snapback gives you more line variation, and they will outflex the modern production counterparts. However, the cons. So the sack fill systems from the older, you know, the lever fills and such, that means you've got way less ink variety to choose from. You've only got a limited amount of ink options. You can't use any special effects like shimmer and all that fun stuff because it could really gunk up these systems and you can't get in there to really truly clean them. So those are the cons. Next one, the best production flex is going to be the Mag 600. If you know that you like flexes and you want the best production flex that you can get right now, that's the Mag 600. This thing feels like a tiny paintbrush. It's awesome. I love how it feels. It feels very different than the vintages, which a lot of people say it's the closest to the vintage. It's not the closest to the vintage at all. Like we talked about, in my opinion, it's on the opposite end of that feel, right? The vintage has that snapback. The modern feel is more of a paintbrushy type feel. However, if you want a flex that is a pleasure to write with and you're looking for a production pen, this is where it's at. The cons. QC and reliability. Mine, you know, is a prime example. It doesn't reliably get a good airtight seal unless I really fiddle with that converter and make sure everything is perfectly oriented. And even then, when I'm carrying it around in my, you know, Galen leather journal, sometimes I'll get an ink drop or two outside the converter. So the QC and the reliability is suspect at times, and especially with that price tag, which is a big con, that shouldn't exist. You know what I mean? If you're spending money, you want it to be, you know, high QC, good reliability. So those are the cons. Best production flex, but, you know, costs a lot and the QC is iffy. All right, so now we're going to look at best reliability and consistency. And this means if you're just going to get one flex pen to kind of see if you like it, and even if you don't like it, you just want a really nice pen that you can use as normal, go with the Pilot 743 Custom. Now this has that extremely reliable consistency here. It is always there for you, no leaks. The Con 70 converter gives you a higher capacity than pretty much anything else here, and it really does have good flex if you're just getting into flex. Some of the cons to the 743 Custom Falcon: it's got more feedback, and that's because it has a finer line. So if you don't care for feedback, or you're not as consistent in your own writing, that might give you kind of little hiccups as you're writing. And overall, it's got less total line variation. So if you're going custom nibs, you know that you love a flex nib. You're skilled and you know how to use it properly without damaging it. So if you want that crisper feel that's a little bit more akin to the vintages, I'm going to go with that FPR Gold Flex Nib, which is actually made by F&F, commissioned by FPR. But anyway, go with that one. However, the cons are it's a wet noodle. That thing takes like 3 minutes to dry. You know, it puts down a ton of shimmer, and the line variation is still there because of that nice snapback. So if you like the kind of more vintage feel, go with that FPR Gold Nib. But if you are more into that paintbrush feel, aka the Mag 600 kind of nice feel, then check out the Salamander nib. That sharkbait flex, oh my god, look at that flex, guys. That is my greatest flexible nib. The con is it's harder to get a fine line because it doesn't have that snapback, and because it can flex just so far that the tiniest bit of pressure means you can't get a fine line. And that's easy to see here on that E over there, because I lifted up and went around and there's absolutely no, delineation. You don't see the little middle part missing from that E, or even on that E, the G barely had a little dot in the middle. So it's harder to get a fine line with the sharkbait, but maximum flex. All right, that was a long video, but thank you for sticking with us, and thank you for checking out all of my thoughts on the Flex nibs, from our productions to our customs back into 100-year-old vintage world. May all your journeys lead to your own personal serenity, my friends.